Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started tonight. So for those of you that would like to sit into a panoramic view of the New Testament, that's what we're doing. And we're glad all of you are here tonight. Just a reminder again, do a little bookkeeping. If you are not getting the PDFs for the class, if you'll let Marlene know, my wife know that, we'll get your email address and we'll send it to you. We still have one or two that are returned every time, and can't seem to find out what's wrong with the emails. But if you're not getting it, but you think you've given us your email, if you'll let her know what it is, then we'll try to take care of that, get that problem solved for you. The next thing is that if you're unable to make it on a particular Wednesday night, you can find this study on our YouTube page. It's Panoramic View of the New Testament, youtube.com, and it should get the copy for like tonight, or I don't know whether we're archiving these things or not, but it doesn't really matter. You should be able to pick these up. Now, as a kind of a quick review, even though we're talking about the panoramic view of the New Testament, what we're doing is we're starting with differences between the Old and the New Testament. And we've already looked at, this is our fifth week, so we've already looked at four others. The first one was the Old Testament is about the creation of heaven and earth, but the New Testament is about the creation of a new heaven and a new earth. It was paradise lost in the Garden of Eden, and paradise will be refound when God rebuilds with a new heaven and a new earth. So we looked at that the first week. The second week, we looked at the Old Testament being about the rebellion of Lucifer. And you might not know much about Lucifer, but that's another name we believe, at least most theologians do, for Satan. It was Lucifer first. He was possibly God's top angel at that time. And anyway, he had a little problem that he got kicked out of heaven, and he became Satan. And we looked at that. And then the third week was about the first Adam and the last Adam. And the first Adam, of course, was Adam and Eve. Those were the first two people. But the last Adam is Jesus. And so we looked at that. And then last week, we looked at the Old Testament. It was about God the Father and his people Israel, while the New Testament is about God the Son and his people, the church. Now, the reason that we're doing the contrast like this is that for the most part, unless you go to seminary, you're never going to study this stuff. You'll get bits and pieces of it. And by the time you're 40 or 50 years old, you'll probably know much of this stuff. But you've got to be in church all the time to get it. And what we're trying to do is short circuit that. We're trying to come up with ways that we can get the information to you that if you went to seminary, you could get it. Okay? I went to seminary because I wanted to study the Bible and figure out what was going on. I didn't go to seminary because I thought I'd be a preacher, but I ended up doing that too. So that's what we're trying to do. So that's what we've been looking at. And tonight we're going to look at another one. The contrast that we're going to look at tonight is identified in John chapter 1 and verse 17. And here's what that verse says. It says, "The law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ." So the contrast tonight between the Old Testament and the New Testament is going to be a contrast between the law and grace. And so as we begin to look at this, let's see if I can get this thing to work. There we go. As we begin to look at it, we're going to look at a question that Paul, the Apostle Paul, asked and he answered. And that question is in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 19. And Paul asked the question. He said, "What purpose then does the law serve?" Okay, he's talking about the law here. We're going to look into find out what that is. And then he goes on to answer the question. He said, "The law was added because of transgressions or sins." So the law came because of sin. And it says, "till the seed," that's Jesus, "should come to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator." So basically what Paul was saying was this. Paul is stating that the law was given because of sin. Now, it was not only given because of sin, it also defines sin, but it was given because man sinned. And it was given until the appointed time of Jesus Christ. Now, you realize that we're no longer under the law, or we don't believe we are. Some denominations do. But we as Christians don't believe that we are. We believe we're under grace, right? Y'all all agree with that? Okay. So that's what we're going to look at, is a contrast between those two tonight. But before we look at that, we want to define the law. Because you may not know what that is. You say, well, yeah, I know it is. It's the laws in the Old Testament. And it is. It certainly is. But we want to try to define it and come up with some of the way that, again, the way that the theologians who study this have defined it. And probably the best book that defines it is actually the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the book of Deuteronomy, the word itself means second law or repeated law. The book of Deuteronomy is repeating a lot of what Moses shared in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. So a lot of that's repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. It's the second law, but it's really not. It's the first law. It's just repeated, is what that means. So it's divided. The book of Deuteronomy is actually divided into 3 parts, but as far as the law is concerned, it's divided into 2 parts. And we're going to look at those, or at least review those tonight. The first part is one you're very familiar with. It's, if you were to look in Deuteronomy chapter 5 through chapter 11, what you'd find is the 10 Commandments. Now, does anybody know where else in the Bible you can find the 10 Commandments? Exodus what? 20? Exodus 20. Well, what happens in Deuteronomy is Moses comes back and expands on those again. But he expands on them over about 3 or 4 or 6 chapters, I guess, here. So he expands on them and he describes them. And the 10 Commandments are general core commandments and laws that are kind of overarching principles that we all try to live by. And we still do. You and I still use the 10 Commandments in our lives, or at least we try to follow them. But in order to have a right relationship with both God and man, those 10 Commandments are needed. In fact, God gave them to us for that reason. And if I'm sure you've done this before, but you realize that the first 4 of these commandments deal with God. Remember that? Like it says, have no other gods before me. Do not make an idol or any likeness of me. God doesn't want us making any likenesses of him. Do not take the name of the Lord God in vain. We've talked about that one before. A lot of people think that means cursing, and it can, but it really doesn't. You know what that means? It means don't say, look, I'm a Christian, and then act like a hoodlum. I mean, that's basically what it means. Don't say I'm a Christian and act like a heathen. Because if we do, then the world looks at us and says, hey, you said you're a Christian, but you're acting just like everybody else. I don't want your God. If he can't do any more than that for you, then I don't want him in my life either. So that's number 4, or number 3. And number 4 says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Remember that? Okay. Now, what day of the week was the Sabbath for the Jews? All right, Saturday. What day of the week do we worship on? We do it on Sunday, and it's called the Lord's Day. Do y'all have any idea why we do that? Day arose. What else? When did the early church meet? On Sunday. And so we just followed their tradition with that. And then in the New Testament also it says, hey, don't let anybody judge you on your Sabbaths. The important thing is you need to have one, right? We don't even really know if Sunday is the actual Sabbath or Saturday. I mean, it's hard to keep up with what days were actually the earlier Sabbaths. But the Jews are really good at keeping up with that, but we're not so good at it. So the first 4 of the 10 Commandments, the 10 laws, were about God. How do we have a right relationship with God? And these are 4 things that give us guidance to do that. The last 6 deal with how to have a right relationship with man. And it starts with one of my favorites. It says, honor your father and your mother. Yes, yes, yes. And we need to remind our kids that all the time, don't we? And our fathers and mothers, mine used to remind me of that all the time. You're not honoring me. I didn't sometimes too. But we are. If you do that, what's the promise? Live a long time. You honor your father and mother, and you'll live a long time. Your days will be increased. It says, do not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness, lying, misrepresenting things. And you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. Well, if I can't covet it, does that mean I can't want anything? What does it mean to covet? Why is that different from just wanting something? Any ideas? Go ahead. Sure. It's wanting something that really you shouldn't be having because it belongs to someone else. And there's nothing wrong with having things that you like, and you can go legitimately get those. But sometimes we want things that other people have, and we'll go and take it away from them. So he doesn't want us doing that, of course. So this is the way it's broken down. And Jesus in the New Testament broke it down even better when he said in Matthew 22 and 37, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That's the first four commandments right there, isn't it? First four commandments, loving God. And then he says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's the last six. So that's the way the Old Testament and New Testament kind of correlate, at least on the laws. So these were 10 commandments or 10 laws, but that's not all. In Deuteronomy chapter 12 through chapter 26, there are many, many statutes and ordinances. And what they do is they describe how you take the 10 commandments and apply them in different areas. Now, remember we talked about a couple of weeks ago that the Pharisees had generated 613 rules from all these laws. And then in addition to that, they had hundreds and hundreds of other rules that would break out how you took each one of those rules and applied them. Well, that's not of God. That part's not of God. But these ordinances and statutes were guides that God gave us in areas like tithing and slavery and religious festivals and sacrifices and kosher foods. Do you know why certain foods were kosher? Was it because God just didn't like hogs? No. Why? It was for health reasons, wasn't it? If you remember, the pigs had certain types of worms. What was I don't remember, trichinosis. And if you ate those uncooked, you get sick and you might die. So God didn't want us to eat those. So he gave us health restrictions. And sometimes we take that to mean that, there's just certain things that are just not good. And those aren't necessarily good for us. But now we cook the ham and I have to have my bacon every morning. But it's well cooked, I promise you. It's nuked. I mean, I don't like anything raw. Prophecy, justice, and worship. So all these are still part of the law. And there were ceremonial laws that the Jews had to go through as well. So all this is made up in the law, but the primary laws were the 10 Commandments. Those were the ones that, when you see the law a lot of times, that's really what they're referring to. So God gave the law in the Old Testament. Now let's go back and find out why. Okay? And here's what Paul said. He said the law was given, it was added because of transgressions. Now, in other words, from transgressions, sometimes we want to delineate the transgressions are against people and sins against God. But anytime you disobey God and you hurt somebody else, it's a sin. So a transgression turns out usually to be a sin as well. So the law was given, it was added because of sins in our lives. And we're going to take a look at that. Now, y'all remember when Adam and Eve were created, they were not given any laws except one. Remember? They were given one law. They lived in the Garden of Eden, wonderful place from what I've read, great place, and one day you and I'll get a chance to live in it again. But they had one rule they couldn't break. They were not supposed to break. Y'all remember what it was, right? Yeah. There you go. Okay. And it says here in Genesis 2 and verses 16 and 17, and the Lord God commanded Adam, saying, Adam, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it. For in the day that you eat thereof you shall surely die. So God said there's one rule. How would you like to just have one rule you had to obey for the rest of your life, but you could do anything else? Be nice, huh? Well, that's all they had was one. And of course, they never did break it. It was just a wonderful rule. And they said, oh, God, we won't, there's no problem. They were never tempted to break this rule. They just had a wonderful life, right? Well, not exactly. Okay. So now, other than this one law and their conscience, because they had their conscience as well, man didn't have any other laws on how to deal with God or how to deal with man. So there were no other laws. That was it. So what happened? Well, by the time of, and y'all remember what happened, they did eat of the tree and they got removed from the Garden of Eden. Okay. And why do you think Satan approached Eve rather than approaching Adam? If you read it carefully, I think you'd know. And if you actually read that, the chapter 2, I think or chapter 3, I guess it was. Chapter 2 is really where it comes in here. It turns out that it appears that God told Adam this before he even created Eve. If you'll look at it in chapter 2, it kind of appears that way. So Eve didn't hear it firsthand from God that you're not supposed to eat of the tree. But Adam told her. So it looks like Satan came to Eve because she didn't have as much information. It wasn't direct from God to her. It was direct from God to man. And then Adam shared it with Eve. And that may have been the reason that he approached her. But listen, by the time of Adam and Eve's children, trouble was already brewing. Man's conscience at that point, now remember, they were removed from the Garden of Eden. They were given one more rule at that point. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But by that time, man's conscience was perverted. By the time of their children, their conscience was already perverted. And we know that. How? Because of Cain and Abel. Remember? And why did Cain kill Abel? I mean, what did Abel do? Did he slander his name? Did he call him ugly names or do something? What did he do? He was jealous of him. And you know what's interesting? Cain and Abel were bringing sacrifices to God. And so what does he do? Cain comes along and kills his brother. He murders him. And he did it, and I'm thinking, look, Bud, you're trying to please God. Do you really think murdering your brother is the way to do it? But, they didn't have any laws and rules in those days. All they had was their conscience. But their conscience should have been in pretty good shape because all they ever knew was God prior to that time. They didn't know him, but Adam and Eve knew him. But Adam and Eve were already propagating to their children some of the sins that they had in their life. So now they've got a perverted conscience. Or it's beginning to be perverted anyway. At least there was murder in line there. So now Adam and Eve and their children's consciences were perverted. And of course, part of it was because of the fall, and that's what started it. But then the other was just individual sin. And certainly with Cain, that was individual sin. So things started growing worse and worse and worse on this earth. And by the time of Noah, things were out of control. Wickedness was out of control. I want you to listen to God describing the situation and his thoughts about what was going on. Here's what God said in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5. Aren't you glad God shares his thoughts with us? These are the thoughts of God, the Creator, not some figment of somebody's imagination. This is the one who created you and me before the foundations of the earth, and he is sharing thoughts that he had with us. And I just think that's fantastic. I just do. So listen to what it says. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. So what he's saying here is that man at this point, whatever came to his mind, that's what he did. He didn't have any constraints. And then it said, the Lord was grieved that he had even made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Now, why do you think God's heart was hurt? Do you think God's heart is hurt when some of us are hurt? When you and I face situations that are awful, do you think that bothers God? Yeah, I think it does. Does it bother you when anyone in your family is hurt or going through trials and tribulations and hard times? Does it? Sure it does. And we are made in the image of God. So I believe that it bothers God. And it said here that it did, that his heart was filled with pain. He had created men and women and boys and girls to love him and walk with him. And now they weren't doing it. In fact, they were in defiance against him. And so he was even sorry he had made man. I thought it was kind of interesting. I was listening to a preacher yesterday when I was coming home from work, and they were talking about Ruth Graham. And somebody asked Ruth Graham one time, said, Ruth, have you ever wanted to divorce Billy? And she said, nope, but I wanted to kill him a few times. And I thought, yeah, sometimes we do, don't we? We get these awful, wicked thoughts in our minds. But at any rate, so here's what God did. So in Genesis 6, verses 7 and 8, so the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. And I'll do that with the animals and the birds and the creatures that move along the ground. For I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of God. And so you remember what God did. He had Noah build an ark, a big boat. Speculated he spent about 120 years trying to build this thing. He preached. He was a preacher. You can imagine what a novelty it was for everyone to come out to Mr. and Ms. Noah's house and see this huge ark when there was probably no water anywhere around. It was just out in the middle of nowhere. And they probably thought that he was crazy. And you can imagine going to Mrs. Noah, going to her bridge club or whatever it is she might have done in those days. Certainly not that. And everybody talking about her nutball husband. And then they bring vans out by his ark to show everybody what's going on. And, it's just, they didn't do any of that, but they had similar things they probably did. And it was probably tough. Think about being one of the Noah kids, and nobody wants to invite you home to spend the night. Nobody wants to be your friend because you got a nutball father. Okay? But he wasn't a nutball when it started raining. And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And so, at any rate, God did. He did go ahead and he eliminated, he destroyed man. And then after the flood, God started all over again with Noah, with his family. And when he did that, man started walking with God. I mean, since that day, we have all walked with God. Is that right? No, I don't think so. That's not right. That is absolutely wrong. Even though God started brand new with a brand new group of people, and God also gave Noah and his descendants the same command he gave Adam and Eve. He gave a second command when Adam and Eve left the garden. And he gave the same command again to Noah and his descendants. And here's what he said. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So is there any question what God's asking them to do? He's saying, listen, now I want you to be very fruitful. Go ahead and, you have kids, have grandkids, have lots of kids, and y'all fill the earth. Fill the earth. Scatter, take over the earth. Now that's what God told Adam and Eve to do too. So let's find out if they did. Well, if you study the scriptures, you know that they didn't do that. They after a few generations of Noah's descendants, they did not do that. Here's what they did. They came together and they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So God said, scatter, go across the whole earth and take dominion of it. They didn't do that. They said, otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. No. We have to come together and build a big city. And not only are we going to build a big city, we're going to build a ziggurat, a big tower that'll go all the way into heaven. And God looked down, and in those days, they had one language, remember? There was only one language. And so God looked down from heaven, and he saw what they were doing. And he realized that they were going to probably be pretty successful at whatever it was they tried to do. And they were certainly going to make a name for themselves. But I don't know who they were trying to impress, since they were the world at that time. So, I mean, they were basically the entire world came together and said, we're going to build a city and we're going to live there. We're not going to go out and scatter and do what God's asked us to do. So they were in direct rebellion against God. This is the entire world. Now, it just happened right before that, except for Adam and Eve. And God had destroyed them with water. So what's he going to do this time? Well, he didn't destroy them. But here's what God said. He said, come, let us. Who's us? God's talking. Who? Yeah, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Come, let us, it says, go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them, or scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. They stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Around Babylon, there is a huge ziggurat they started, that looks like they started to build, that actually has some bricks and things inscripted in it that talk about the language, the confusion of tongues is what it says, not language. I mean, there's actually a ziggurat they believe was this attempted tower that the children of Israel were trying to build at that particular time. So, I mean, you can look this stuff up. And by the way, last night, Don and Susan Turnage and Marlene and I were talking, and Susan's got a book on the archaeology. I think it's the New Testament, isn't it, Susan? But what we were talking about is there has never been an archaeological discovery that's refuted anything that's in the Bible. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say that, but after you check it out, you'll find that's not true. So check it out. And this is one of those that you can check out. All right. So now man's conscience is not working anymore. It's not. It's perverted. It's wicked. So God's made a decision. Now, he knew before the foundation of the earth this was going to happen. But he made a decision to set some standards and laws of conduct and for men. So here's what he did. He gave Moses what we call today the Ten Commandments. Y'all remember? Moses went up and got the Ten Commandments. He had them on tablets, and came back down. And when he came back down, the people were so excited. We can't wait to see you, Moses. We want to worship you. We want to worship God. We want to see what's in the Ten Commandments. Is that what they were doing? What were they busy doing when he came back down? Worshiping a golden calf. He was gone for 40 days up into the mountains. And when he came back down, they were busy worshiping a golden calf. And guess who was the instigator of it? His good old brother, Aaron. Aaron said, now y'all go get all of your golden earrings and all your golden whatevers and bring rings and bring them in. And he melted them down and made a golden calf. And he said, now this is the God we're going to worship. Now, I don't know how on earth you think that you can make a God and all of a sudden a golden calf and it becomes a God. But they did, because they wanted a God they could see. And so, I mean, it's a mess at this time. So Moses breaks the tablets, but eventually, remember, he goes back and gets them again and comes back down. So scripturally, when you start looking at why God gave the law, there's a lot of different reasons for why he gave the law, but there's three primary reasons that he gave the Ten Commandments of the law. And the first reason was this. It was to teach man what it meant to be holy or separated unto and set aside for God and his use only. Okay? One of the first reasons was to teach man how to be holy. How to be holy. Remember, God says, I'm holy, so therefore you be holy. Remember God said that? He said, and there's some other places we'll see that too. Now, they didn't know how to be holy. All they knew how to do was be wicked, and they were really good at that. Okay? But they needed to be taught to be holy. Do you know you have to teach babies to be good? But you don't have to teach them to be mean. You don't. Babies are born. They're sweetest little things in the world as long as they're cooing there. But if they want something and another kid's got it, they'll bop that kid right on top of the head with a toy and grab it and jerk it out of their hands, and it doesn't bother them a bit in the world. It doesn't. So what do, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles? You spend your time raising your kids to change them. Okay, that's the problem we got here. We got a bunch of babies that don't know how to function in life. They don't know how to be good, but they sure know how to be bad. And so that was the situation. So God is going to try to use the law to teach them how to be holy and to be separated unto him and set aside for him and his use only. So let's take a look at that. Look at this verse in Leviticus 20 and verses 7 and 8. Now God is speaking through Moses, and here's what he said. Moses is talking to the children of Israel, and he said, consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am the Lord your God. Now God's speaking, but he's speaking through Moses. He said, keep my decrees and follow them. I am the Lord who makes you holy. Okay? So we see some words in here. We see holy, we see consecrate, and we want to take a look at those a little bit more. Now, I've already told you once what this word holy means, but tonight I'm going to review it for you. And for those of you that I've taught in Sunday school or wherever else, you've heard it 5 million times, but that's okay. I'm going to give you 5 million and one. But both in the New Testament, the Greek word for holy sometimes it's pronounced hagios or agios. It can have an H on it, but in this case, it's got an agios. And in the Old Testament, that same word in Hebrew is quadash. Okay, quadash. But both of those words mean the same thing. They both mean set aside exclusively for God and his use only. If something is holy, this is a holy building. And we better not ever come in here and see people selling things and treating it like a business. No. This is God's house and it's holy. It's his house. It's not ours. No, it's not. And so holy means that this building has been set aside for God's use and God's use only. It's not for a garage sale, though I've seen churches do garage sales. Thank goodness I never saw it in their sanctuary, but I've seen it in a lot of other places in their buildings. But that's not what God gave the building for. He gave the building for his glory. But he does the same thing with us, doesn't he? He sets us aside to be holy as well. So that's what the word holy means. But there's another word here too. It says, consecrate yourselves and be holy. You know what the Hebrew word or the root word for the word consecrate is? It's a root word for consecrate. It's the same word. It's literally quadris. And in this case, it means the act of setting oneself aside for God and his use only. Okay, so consecrate means you actively set yourself aside for God's use and God's use only. Now, when you do that, and you are set aside for God's use and God's use only, you are holy. Okay? We're holy. And every born-again believer is called a saint. And the saint gets its original origin from the word agios, which means holy. A saint is supposed to be a holy person. That does not mean that I am Saint Jerome. You know, y'all have read about me, I'm sure. If you've ever been to a Catholic church, they talk about Saint Jerome. But I am a saint, and my name is Jerome. And you're a saint. If you're a born-again believer, you are a saint in God's eyes. That means he's chosen you, but you've been set aside for his use and his use only. Not so you can go in all the football games or so you can go and be a great business person. No. Now, those are ancillary things that God may bless you with, but you weren't set aside for that purpose. You and I are set aside for God's use and God's use only. That means when God calls, we're supposed to respond to him. And so that's what this concept is. And God tells us, consecrate yourself. Set yourself aside to be holy. And holy means set aside for God's use and his use only. Not for yours, not for anybody else's, but for yours only. I met a guy one time, when I first went to Florida State to teach there, I met a guy, and he and I got to talking, I found out he was a Christian. And here's what he told me. He said, I live where I want to live and I work where I have to. And I said, don't understand you. I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, my church life is the most important part of my life, my relationship with Jesus. And so I find a church where I can really plug in. And then I'll move there and I'll take whatever job I have to in order for me to sustain my relationship with God and go to the church that I believe God's called me to go to. And I thought, wow, you're different. Okay? I mean, most of the time I moved because of jobs, but that's not what he did. He had a different approach to it, and he was right, actually. He was actually right. I really respected that guy. So anyway, consecration is an act. It's a process. And you and I are going through that process every day. Sanctification is a consecration process. Sanctification is saint training. Okay? It's learning how to be a saint. It's learning how to be set aside for God's use and God's use only. Listen, when you and I come to church, we come to church to learn more about God so we can be set aside more for Him. And every time we come to church, it's saint training. We're learning how to be a better saint. And then holy is the condition of being set aside. Once we are set aside, then we are becoming more and more holy. Okay? So that's what those words mean. And that's the concept God is talking about here. So one reason God gave His law was to teach us how to be holy. Now, a lot of people are possibly not holy, but God wants us to be. And the way to become holy is given to us by Paul. Actually, he gave it to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And he said, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Do you know how you can be equipped for every good work of God? Study His Word. One of the reasons we're doing this is to help you so you and I can learn more about God so we can study His Word easier. That's the reason we're doing this. We're not doing this to waste anybody's time. We're doing it so that we can look into the Scriptures and realize that that's where God's teaching is. And we can learn all we need to know about walking with Him by reading the Scriptures. So that's what we want to be able to do. And we want to be able to find things in the Scriptures and know where they are. That's the reason we're doing the contrast right now. So if you were going to look for the law, you don't look in the New Testament. You guys are going to head to the Old Testament. And it's just filled with the law. If you want to look at grace, you don't go to the Old Testament, you go to the New Testament. Now, there's one thing I don't want you to be confused about. The way of salvation has never changed. It's always been by faith. Okay, that's never changed. But the process of that faith, how it was lived out, was different in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Now, there's a second reason that God gave the law, and it was to reveal the sinfulness of man and to show that man cannot be justified by the law. Now, this kind of sounds like, well, what are you really saying there? Well, we're sinners. The law is going to remind us that we're a sinner. Okay? And not only is it going to do that, by me trying to live that law, I'm going to find out I'm not doing a very good job of living that law, and I'm not going to ever be justified before God by living it. And there's another aspect to that as well. So that's kind of the concept of what we're talking about here. And listen to what Paul said in Romans. He said, no one will be justified in God's sight by the works of the law. No one. Because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. So we've got two things here we're going to look at. We're going to look at the second one first. The knowledge of sin comes through the law. All right? So God gave His law to teach us how to be holy, how to be right with God, and how to be right with other men and women. So Paul mentions here that God also gave His law to make us aware of sin, to give us a knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, of sin and obedience. How would you know something's wrong unless God tells you? You don't know. It's just your opinion versus my opinion. But if God says there's so many things in the Scriptures, gang, we never have to pray about because God's already told us what the answers are. And if God doesn't tell us, we don't know what the answers are so many times. And so we can just argue back and forth, but God's saying, no. I'm going to tell you what is good, and I'm going to tell you what's evil, so you will know the difference between those two. So that's what God does with His Word. And it goes on to say that without the law, there would be no knowledge of sin. Right? Now, when you were younger, your mom and daddy, the one word you learned first was not mom and daddy. It was probably no. I know with our kids, it was like, no, no, no. I was always worried they were going to hurt themselves or do something they shouldn't do. But our children learn what's right and wrong from us. We tell them, no, this is not right, and this is right. We tell them God does that with us too. And so that's one of the reasons He gave the law, was to tell us the difference between right and wrong. So even though God has given us His law, He doesn't want us to be deceived. That's what He said. I don't want you to be deceived. Now, why? Did you know that God doesn't want us to think that just by living the law, by just living the law, we can be justified before Him? You remember what justified means? Just as if I've never sinned. Remember that? Just as if I've never sinned. That's what the word justifies means. If you and I lived a perfect life from this day forward, that is not what God's looking for. You say, what? That sounds like a contradiction. It's not. It's absolutely not. And it's not because God doesn't want a robot. Do you know that God could have made you so you could not possibly have sinned? He could have made you an automaton, a computer. And the computer is garbage in, garbage out, or good in, good out. He could have made you that way. So if God said, Jerome, go do this, Jerome's got to go do it. And I don't have any thoughts about it. I just am forced to do it because God made me that way. God did not make us that way. He didn't. He gives us a choice. He gave us a free will. Now, there's limits on that free will, but He gave us a free will. We're free to choose Him or not to choose Him, but He does not want a robot. He's looking for children. And when you have children, you want a relationship with that child. I've never met a mother and father that did not want to have a relationship with their children. Never. Now, many of them don't. I have a good friend right now, and he's got the worst relationship with his two boys and his daughter of any parent I've ever seen. And he's so hard-headed, he won't do anything about it. We talk about it, and I try to encourage him. But that doesn't keep him from being concerned about his kids. He's very concerned about them. He just won't do anything. He won't go and say, hey, we got to get this thing solved. So the point behind this is God's not looking for robots. He's looking for a relationship. He's looking for a child. He wants you and I to be His children or like His children. But we all have a relationship problem, don't we? We do. Every one of us in here has a relationship problem with God. And what is that relationship problem? Here it is right here. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Every person in this room has sinned. And we haven't sinned just one time. We've sinned many, 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 many times. And we probably may have sinned even here tonight, sitting in here, as we may have said something or looked at somebody and thought something that maybe wasn't what would be pleasing to God. We do it, don't we? We all do. Okay? But the deal with this is that when we do that, we're rebelling against God. Sin is rebellion against God. It's saying, look, God, I know you created the universe, but old Bubba here ain't going to do it. I don't care what you say. I know best, and I will not do it. Now we say, oh, no, we don't act like that. Yeah, but that's what we're doing when we rebel against God or when we sin. And you realize that one sin carries a capital offense. If you and I have ever sinned just once, it carries a capital crime. It's a capital crime. It carries a capital offense. And notice what it says here. For the wages of sin is death. That's a capital offense. And if you've ever sinned once, we've got that capital offense. Now, what is easier? If you hurt somebody physically or if you hurt somebody with your words. If someone says something really ugly and mean to you, I can tell you that hurts me, and it's harder for me to forget than if somebody were to break my finger accidentally. And it's generally true. Now, you think about God now. When you and I rebel against God and we say, I'm not doing what you say. I know you created the universe. I know you think you're smart, God, but you're not as smart as me. When we do that, it breaks the heart of God. And fellowship is broken. When Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, what was the first thing that happened when God showed up that afternoon? They hid. Why did they hide? They were ashamed. Okay? They had broken fellowship immediately with God. And that's what happens. And we come into this world carrying a broken fellowship, and it doesn't take us long when we're first born, we're okay, but then later on, we carry with us that broken fellowship. So just doing things will not create a relationship with God or solve our rebellious past. Just because I'm going to say, now look, from now on, I'm going to be really good. I'm going to be really, really good. But I don't have a relationship with you, God. I'm just going to be good. God's saying, that's not what I want. I want a relationship with you. That's the reason he gave the law, was to show us that we're sinners. We need to know it, and we are. And we need to know what the wages of sin is. So that's the reason that Paul said, no one will be justified in God's sight by the works of the law. And we will not, because God is not looking for a robot. God is looking for children. Okay? So here I have, God, what work must I do to get into heaven? And God says, there's nothing you can do. I just want you. Look, your kids, you don't want your kids giving you gifts. You just want your kids to love you, don't you? Or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews. You just want them to love you. That's all. God's the same way. So he's a great father, and he's given us a lot of examples so we can learn about how his relationship with us is. And then there's a third and last primary reason that God gave the law in the Old Testament. It was to lead man to Christ that he might be justified by faith. Now remember, we're not going to be justified by works or by the law, but we can be justified by faith, and believe it or not, the law actually will lead us to that. It says, wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. Now, we've got a lot of school teachers in here, and a schoolmaster is a school teacher. And a school teacher, why do we have school teachers? What do? They point us towards a better way. And hopefully by the time your child has gone through this year with their school teachers or your grandchildren or your nieces and nephews, by the time they've gone through that, they are in a better way than they were when they started. And that's the object of a school teacher, and that is also the way the law is. The law points us to a better way, okay? And it will. So let's see how it does it. So how does this work? Well, when we start, if we believe that our relationship with God depends on our obedience to the law, and a lot of people do, a lot of people believe that they have to work their way into heaven. They got to be good. I had a guy in our church when I was a pastor at Seagrove, and he was a retired police officer, and he was a tough guy. I told y'all a story about him one time, so I won't repeat it. But he was a tough guy. And I was constantly talking to him about you need to get saved. Now, he came each week. He'd come to church each week. And he kept saying, I can't do it because I'm not good enough. I got some things I got to work out first to be good enough, and then I'll accept Jesus. And I kept saying, you'll never be good enough. As far as I know, he died not good enough. It was so sad because I talked to him over and over about it, but he didn't. And but if you believe that you have to be, that your life depends on your works before God, you got a heavy burden on your head. I'll give you another example. I led this little boy to the Lord, and we were going to baptize him, and it was in the wintertime. And at that time, we did not, in a church I was in, we didn't have a baptistry. So we baptized in swimming pools. But it was in the wintertime, it was cold, and there was it was really cold that day, and there was a little bit of ice on the top of the swimming pool, so we decided we wouldn't baptize that day. So after service that day, this boy's father came up to me, and he was livid. I mean, he was furious. And he said, do you know what you're doing? You may cause my son to go to hell. And I said, what? What are you talking about? You didn't baptize him. I said, no, I didn't. I said, it was cold. I mean, gee whiz, what's your problem? No, don't you understand? If he had died, he would go to hell because he's not baptized. And I said, sir, you got a little problem here. We need to talk about this thing. See, he believed that it was the works you do that earned your honor before God. And it's not. It's just not. We shared with him, and I don't know if he ever got that one squared away. He was really concerned about that thing. He was about ready to string me up for not baptizing. We did baptize his son later on, but I was just shocked. I mean, that he was so works-oriented. Now, here's the deal. If we are, I had an aunt that was that way. She believed that at the end of time, that what God would do is he would weigh on one hand all your good works, and he would weigh on the other hand all your bad works. And if your bad works were less than your good works, or your good works were greater than your bad works, you've got to go to heaven. If it was the other way around, you didn't make it. She really believed that. And there are denominations today that do that. And I have a Muslim friend that believes that. Now, they're not supposed to be friends with Christians, but I call him that all the time just to irritate him. I'll tell people, I say, I want y'all to meet my friend, And but he and I talk about God all the time. He always wants me to admit that Jesus and Allah are the same ones, and I say, no, they're not. Jehovah and Allah or Jesus, they're not the same gods at all. I said, yours is no God, but I got the real one. But at any rate, his wife told him, I think I've told some of y'all this before, his wife told him one day, says, you're going to have to stay away from those guys. They're going to lead you to Jesus. I thought, yep, we're right. We're trying. One day, maybe he'll come to know the Lord. Anyway, here's the deal. If you really believe that, you've got a burden on your life all the time. No matter what you do or where you go, you're trying to figure out, am I doing enough good works? Are they good enough to get me into heaven? What if I died and I'm in sin? If I did, would I go to hell? So that's the problem that you have. It's a big, big burden. Because that burden is so great, what it'll do is it'll cause our hearts to yearn for a better way. It will. We'll just wish, oh God, I hate going through this. It's just too much for me. And many times it'll lead us to seek a better way. It'll do it. The Bible can do that. The law can do that. And so that's what it means when it's talking about that this can lead us to Christ and lead us to faith. And it can, because it's a better way. And that's what we're going to look at now. Now, what this does now, this is going to turn us back to our original question that Paul answered, both asked and answered. Remember, he first said it was because of transgressions that we have the law, but he said this law will last until the promised seed, or Jesus, would come. So now we're at the point where this law has been in force, and now Jesus has shown up. Okay? So Jesus is now on the scene. So after Jesus came, I want you to notice how things changed. It says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing, it is the gift of God, not of a result of works, so that no one may boast. All right? If you'll notice, there's some special little words in here. Of course, one is grace. Y'all know what grace is. But it'll tell you what grace is here. Grace is a gift of God. Grace is not something you earn. It's not a works. It's not something you deserve. No. It's a gift of God. You don't deserve gifts, but God's going to give us a gift, and it's called grace. And so, in fact, the grace he's going to give us will save us. It's a grace that'll lead to salvation. So this is the New Testament. Now we're into the New Testament. Jesus has come. He's now died on the cross. And as a result of that, we now have access to God by grace. And so, and then he's going to give us a gift, unmerited gift. And so this grace will produce salvation. If you are saved, it is not because of anything you've ever done, not because you've ever joined a church, not because you've taught a Sunday school class, or you've been a deacon, or you've been a whatever in any way. That's not going to get you into heaven, will it? Just won't. That's just not the way it works. That's not the way God set it up. Now, he could have, but he didn't. And listen to what Paul, remember again, he reinforced this. He said the law was our schoolmaster to bring us into Christ. So the law was given with its heavy burden, to help us realize that, wow, Christ is a much different approach to this thing. It's a much better approach. That we might be justified by faith. Now, justified again is just as if we've never sinned. My faith and your faith in the eyes of God will justify us before God. Don Attorneys and I were talking last night about, we were talking about how certain religions have certain requirements in order for you to be what they call saved. Please hear me. If you depend on anything other than Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection, anything, if you depend on anything else, doesn't matter what it is, for your salvation, it is not of God. It's just not. It's just not. And we were talking about that, and because there's some people, they'll count 100 Hail Marys. That ain't going to get you into heaven. That won't. I'm not trying to put them down. It's fine to remind yourself about prayers and things, but that won't get you into heaven. You know, it's got to be by faith and faith alone. And how is that faith going to be aimed? How do we activate that grace? John 3:16. It's a verse. You all know it. For God so loved the what? The world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have what? Everlasting life. So our faith is a belief. It's a belief in Jesus. And so Don and I were talking, I said, Don, I'm held out over a big ravine by the hand of Jesus. And if he's not real, I'm in deep trouble, because I have nothing else that can hold me and get me into heaven except Jesus. Nothing. And that is true. It's by faith in him and what he's done. So that's what he's saying here. So it's simply, in order to activate this grace, it requires faith in Jesus, that he is the Son of God, that he died on a cross for our sins. And also there's one more, that he was born of a virgin. Okay? Because we want to argue about that one too. Oh, golly, no, I can't believe that he was born of a virgin. My gosh, listen to me. If God could create this universe and make you and me, he has no problem creating a baby in a virgin's womb. He doesn't have any problems doing that. Now, maybe the world doesn't want to believe that, but that's okay. They don't believe in Jesus anyway, but we do, and we want to make sure we're solid in our beliefs. So what we've looked at tonight is, in summary, we've looked at the Old Testament, and it talked about the law and all the things that the law did. It's there to help us be holy, so you and I'll know how to be holy. It's also to make us aware that we're sinners. It's there to make sure we realize that we cannot be good enough to live that law. Okay? I mean, we just can't. I have what I call flesh flashes. Y'all ever have a flesh flash? It's when you act like you're a Christian, but you act like a heathen for about 2 or 3 seconds. Okay? I mean, somebody pulls in front of you in line or gets in front of you in line. I used to hate going going out to eat on Sunday, okay? Because I'd go and I'd be in line with my little family, and there'd be somebody standing in front of me, and about a minute later, 14 people would join them and get right in front of me. And you talk about having a flesh flash. My goodness, if I only had a way to take care of that situation. Or you're driving along on the road, and somebody cuts you off with all kinds of finger signs. And so, I think, if I had a cannon, I'd blow you off the road. Okay? We have those flesh flashes. But when I do that, I realize that what I did was wrong. And it breaks my heart. Does it break yours? It does, doesn't it? As a Christian, it does. So the Old Testament was all about the law, and now we're under grace. And grace is God's unmerited gift that he gives us, undeserved gift of salvation, if we will simply choose to have a relationship with Jesus, his Son. He wants a relationship, and that's what he's asking us to do too. Okay? Let's go before the Lord and let's thank him for our time. Father, thank you so much for the time you've allowed us to be together tonight. Thank you for your word, and also, Lord, for the contrast between the law and grace. Lord, I'm so thankful we're not under the law anymore. Good gracious, having to go to the temple or the tabernacle multiple times a year and sacrifice animals. And every time we sin, Lord, we got to go back and do it again. Man, I'd live at the tabernacle, Lord. But we don't have to do that anymore. All we have to do is come before your throne. You've already forgiven us. By our asking you to forgive us and by our belief in you, Lord, you've already forgiven us. But we do need to confess our sins so, Lord, we'll have a right relationship with you. Thank you for that. Lord, I pray for every person that's in this room tonight. I pray that you'll bless them. I pray that this week you'll reveal yourself to them, that every one of us will see you, not just one time, but every day. And when we see you, we'll know it was you. And Lord, we'll recognize it, and we'll give you the praise and the honor and the glory for revealing yourself, so we'll know that there is a God. And Father, any way you can use us this week, we pray that you will. We love you, we praise you, and we ask this in Jesus Christ's name. And all God's people said, amen. Okay, gang, next time, next week. See y'all later. Have a good night.